Djay Pro landscape mode versus portrait mode. Which is better? I'm DJ Spiegelspin and I'm going to talk about it in this video. Should you use Djay Pro in landscape mode or in portrait mode? Well, the answer is it depends on what kind of DJ and what kind of music and what style of DJing you plan on doing, because some of the features are not available on the screen when you switch to portrait mode. So I'm going to go through the different screens and different modes and let you know what would be good for portrait and what would be good with landscape based on the genre of music that you play or your style of DJing. So let's get right into it, starting with classic mode. So in classic mode, when you first turn on the app, you will see this screen. So you got these two old school turntables, and you got your play button, your pause button, you got narrow mix and all of that. And you could also press any of these buttons up here. So this gives you a mixer section in the middle with volume slider and with a filter, and then you could have the EQs over here, and you could also switch it to narrow mix. Or if you like to see the waveforms, you could see the waveforms in a limited view on this screen. So when I scratch and even when I beat match and mix, I always like to see the waveforms so I can keep my eye on it. So it's very important for me to have the waveforms on the screen. Some DJs never use waveforms or they don't think it's important, so then that's not an issue. So now we have access to the looper and sampler. A lot of my people that subscribe to my channel, they DJ reggae music, and reggae DJs use the sampler and use the looper almost in every set that they do in every DJ performance, so it's very important to them. So now let's flip it over to portrait mode. So we're still in classic, but we're gonna flip it over to portrait mode. So the app is designed to optimize the space on the screen so you could do the most stuff possible from one single screen. So when you flip it in the portrait, they adjust the screen is different. So now the first thing that you'll notice in portrait mode on classic mode is that we don't have any access to the looper or sampler. I played around with it, I tried moving stuff, but you have no access to the sampler or the looper. So this is very upsetting to DJs that really like this mode, because if you're a DJ that likes having these big jog wheels, maybe you like scratching on the screen, or you're an old school DJ and you're just used to the look of it, then you love having these large jog wheels. I believe these are the largest jog wheels in any DJ app. So if you're an iPad only DJ, this mode is great for scratching and also for effects. Some DJs that play trance music or techno music, they always have an effect on. It might be subtle, it might not be turned all the way up, it might just be a little reverb or a little echo or something, but they always use their effects and it's important to them. So this screen is perfect for a DJ that likes having big old school jog wheels and that uses effects a lot. But now a lot of people have been asking me, how do you access the sampler in this screen? And the answer is you can't. There's only one way around it if you want to play samples and you're using this screen. It's to plug in your controller. So I'm going to plug in this controller right now. So now we plugged in the controller. So as you see, if you switch the controller to samples, so we're switched to samples. Now let's go back over, let's just go to looper mode over here. And we're playing our samples like that. I don't know why I don't have any volume coming out. Oh. Okay. So what you have to do is go here, and then since I have a controller plugged in, I'm just going to switch the output to the speaker. Okay, so now we're going over here. We're in classic mode and we have no access to the sampler on the screen. But if we press one of our sample buttons on our controller, you have access to all of your samples. So even though you can't see it, it doesn't mean that it's not there. So that's why what the point of a controller is to not be so dependent on the screen. So if you're a DJ that loves classic mode but wants to use the sampler, unfortunately, the only way around it is to use a controller. Now, what you could do is you could plug in two controllers at the same time if you have a splitter with multiple USB ports like this one. So you could be using this controller to DJ with, and then you could have another controller that has a lot of pads and stuff, and you can map the pads, or if it's already pre-mapped, then you could use your second controller for the samples, or you could get something like a Novation Launchpad or another type of button box. It doesn't have to be an actual DJ controller, but then you could be DJing with your controller, doing all the stuff you want to do DJ wise, and then just have the samples right there. So that's the way to use the sampler in classic mode, and that's the only way. So let's unplug the controller for now, and let's go back to landscape mode. So now we're going into Pro mode. This is the most comprehensive mode in the app. It's the mode that I always use when I DJ, because you have access to the waveforms, you have access to jog wheels, your effects, and pretty much anything that you would ever need, you have access to. But now what happens when we switch over to portrait mode? So the same thing happens in portrait mode. We lose the looper and the sampler. So if the looper and the sampler is very important to you, then you might want to keep it in portrait or do the workaround that I told you with the controller. So in portrait mode, you get a really nice big view of the waveforms, but you don't get any jog wheels. And that might not be an issue because you could use the waveforms to scratch. You could use the waveforms to adjust the speed if you're doing beat matching, and it's just preference. I prefer scratching with the waveforms. I think it's easier if you're just using the iPad. So if you're a pro mode user, you might want to keep it in portrait mode if that's what you prefer, as long as you don't want to be able to see the looper and the sampler. So you have effects and you have access to everything except jog wheels. So let's go back to portrait mode, and we're going to switch to looper mode. So this is the looper mode with the samplers open, and this is the looper mode with the loops open. The difference is you get access to these volume sliders for the individual loops, and in pro mode you just get access to all of them, but you can't control that individual volume. So, but besides that, there's really no point of using looper mode. I would recommend using pro mode because you still have access to everything else. But if you are someone that frequently uses the looper, you make your own beats and you do loops and samples and you produce your own tracks, then I would suggest using looper mode in portrait, because now you have access to all the loops, all the samples, and you could access the volume. So once you set a loop, you could control the volume of that specific loop, but then you'd have to switch back. So you press this volume button, and you could change the loop. So in portrait mode, the looper and the sampler is much better, and you could see more stuff and control more stuff. And then down here, you could access your volume slider and your everything that you could access in portrait mode in classic and pro, you could access here under the loops, and you still have access to every loop and every sample. So if you're a looper or a sampler user, I would suggest going to loop mode and keeping it on portrait. But the only thing is, you don't have any access to jog wheels, you don't have any access to the waveforms. So if you're a scratch DJ that likes to scratch and then throw on a sample, it's going to be very difficult. So if you're one of those DJs that uses the looper, uses the sampler, but still wants jog wheels and control of the effects and everything, I would recommend doing classic mode in portrait and then using a controller or a different device. You could get this controller for only like $89 or any other controller very cheap, and you're just using the buttons. You can map every button on the controller to control anything on the looper. So if we go here and plug in our controller, now we're going to go over here to MIDI devices, get our device, and now we're going to go press a button. So I'm pressing the sync button. So it's deck to sync. Let's do target is going to be sampler. And then we could set play because with this controller we have 4 buttons, but let's add a 5th one. So there we go. We added a 5th one. So now if we go over here where we could see it in looper mode, we got that's 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then sync is 5, and then you could do the rest with the Q button. Any button you could put as the sampler. So don't be discouraged if, oh, this controller only has 4 buttons for loops and samples. You could put any single button could be programmed for the looper and sampler. So just keep that in mind, and I hope this helped you solve any frustrations you've had with trying to do things in different mode. The answer for some issues is that it can't be done. You can't access the looper or the sampler in classic or pro mode when it's in portrait. So there's always a way to work around if you think out of the box, and my suggestion, which is I believe the only suggestion, is by using a controller. So with a controller, you can control functions that you can't see. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. So I hope you guys learned something from this video. I hope it really helped you solve a problem. And if you like learning about Djay Pro and DJing with the iPad, subscribe to my channel. I make DJ videos every single day.